I want to start by saying that I think that teens of all kids might be having the hardest time and at the same time the easiest time, right? Like they know how to interact with the world mostly, and they just kind of do this, and then they don't have to talk to their parent. I'm sorry. And then they don't have to talk to their parents, but then nobody knows what's going on with them. And basically we all evolved as teenagers to get out of the cave. And so it's like you're 17 years old, you're 16 years old, and you're like, my whole body and brain and heart are saying I should like go out and do stuff. And we're like, yeah, but instead stay in your basement and take care of your little sibling and talk to your parents about your feelings. And they're like, no, thanks. So I think that we have a huge opportunity to give our teenagers a chance to mostly connect with other teenagers. That's our goal when we're doing our teen programming, is how do we let them connect with other teenagers and take, this is going to sound a little bit weird, but I think it's possible, take little tiny risks that happen that are safe online. And most of those risks are going to be about like maybe sharing how they're actually feeling with a group of people, or maybe making a joke with friends, like people that they're just meeting and they're not sure how it's going to land. But like they can take these tiny risks almost like they would take sitting at their lunch table at school or things like that. How can we start to facilitate those kind of spaces for teenagers? And we were pretty nervous about running teen programming because teens are pretty good already at playing Fortnite or Minecraft or Call of Duty or whatever.
Jack's frozen. We'll give him a minute to see if he comes back. But I think what Jack was saying is that we were certainly nervous going into our teen retreat weekend about how it would look, and we came out feeling a lot more motivated in knowing that that real connection is possible. I was certainly really surprised that so many of our teens were willing to be silly and really participate in some of that camp stuff. So to start today, before we get into, like Jack said, some of the actual programming that we run, we're going to start with a game, like we've been starting a lot of these calls. And this game is called Ask the Expert. I think it could work for teens and younger kids as well. So how it works is I'm going to need 4 volunteers. Anyone's willing to participate in the game, maybe put your hand like this if you'd be willing to participate. In the meantime, I'll tell you what you'd be signing up for. Thank you, Mark. You are 1. Spot. Winnie, thank you. 1 more.
Leanne? Nice.
All right, Jack, you got it.
You can unmute yourself. Sorry, internets are weird. That's why you've got a co-host. Okay, here's what's going to happen. You've probably played this game before. We call it Ask the Expert. And what's going to happen is in the chat, people are going to put questions, and I'll pick the questions that we're going to ask you to answer as the expert. And the expert is the 4 people that we just chose, and in order. So remember your order. Mark, you're going to be number 1. Spot, you're number 2. Who's the third person, Klee?
Winnie,
you're going to be number 3, and Leanne, you're going to be number 4. And you're going to answer a question 1 word at a time. So Mark will say 1 word, then Winnie will say the next word. Then Spot will say the next word, then Winnie will say the third word. Leanne will go around and you'll try and build a sentence that answers the question. You've probably played this before. Here's how we play it on Zoom. And anybody can put questions in the chat for the expert. They're all knowing. They know the future. They know the past. They know it all. Okay. MJ wants to know, Captain Expert, starting with Mark, what's your favorite breakfast?
My
favorite
breakfast
is
fried
bananas.
Nice. All right. And Winnie, you're leading off this one. Why is the sky blue?
the
sky, sorry.
is
Blue
Because
It
shifts
personalities
around
the
spectrum
of
color.
Hey! All right. That was great. So we call that Ask the Expert. A lot of times we do it during campfires or skits and things like that. I'm sure many of you have seen something similar. A lot of these we're just doing to bring some of real campy things to Zoom so that you can see what they might look like, and then it's easy, right? The easier things are, then the more fun we can have with the jokes around them. Thank you very much, everybody. Give me one of these for our experts. That was great. And Allison, my dear friend, Klee. I forgot that people might not know your name is actually Allison. That's insider language. Your name is actually Allison Klee. I did that yesterday too. Klee,
Yes.
what the heck do we even do with teens? Can you give us the framework for what this like retreat was?
Yes, you got it. So our teen retreat programming started on Friday evening and ran through Sunday. So right now, Jack and I are going to go back and forth sharing some of the activities that we did. A lot of times, we're going to give you the examples we did. And like Jack said, take the icebreakers or games of ours that you liked and change up whatever you don't like. So Friday, we started with sharing our names, and our icebreaker question we did was, if you could quarantine with any celebrity right now, who would it be? Some of the teens knew each other. They didn't all know each other. So we used the popcorn method that we use a lot on Zoom, where I share, and then I would say, Leanne, can you go next? Leanne shares, and so on. So that's how we kicked off Friday. And then after that, we moved into a game. On the PDF that Astin put in the chat, it includes this entire write-up. Some games that we played with teens were Pictionary. There's an explanation of how to run that on Zoom. You could also run Ask the Expert like Jack just did. And then we gave another write-up for the game called Last Word. If you were here yesterday, we opened with that. And then after we played a game, we ran Embers, which is at Stomping Ground what we call our reflective activity of the day. I know a lot of camps have a lot of different names for this activity, but we ran a gratitude circle where people could chime in and share something that they were grateful for. Again, if you were on yesterday, we did that activity on our Zoom call. And then we also built into the schedule some unstructured, what we called hangout time. So after we finished our gratitude circle, we said 2 staff are going to stay on to hang out a little bit longer if you don't want to sign off just yet, so that teens could just talk, hang out. And we probably waited online with them for like 45 minutes. And then most of them were like, all right, see y'all tomorrow. So that is how our Friday looked. And now Jack will talk about the next day.
Cool. So then on Saturday, we came back at about 10 o'clock. Originally, we had earlier programming planned. And if any of you know teenagers, most of them didn't love that idea. So we pushed everything back to start at 10 a.m. Because why push the earlier time? We thought we would need a lot more programming to have kind of an immersive time. And what we realized is that teens, like all of us, need breaks from the screen. And so we scaled back some of the programming. And from 10 to 12, we did kind of a TED Talk discussion, and we posted what Laura ran in the PDF. But basically, we watched a TED Talk and then had prompted discussion where people split into breakout rooms and discussed what they saw in the TED Talk. Then we came back and discussed it as a big group. Then we watched another TED Talk and did the same thing. So really simple. Again, the goal isn't necessarily, from our perspective, to have the most mind-blowing ideas, but rather to make it an easy and accessible way for kids to get started having a conversation so that teens can build connection. That was the number one goal. We called it a leadership retreat, so we discussed a little bit of leadership stuff, but we kind of reframed leadership around leadership being about connection first, because that's what we think is kind of the big thing that kids need at the moment. So that was 10 to 12 on Friday or on Saturday. Klee, what happened from 2 to 4?
Yeah, so we took a break, and then in the afternoon, we led different options that teens could choose from that were each 1 hour long. So how we ran that is we all logged on at 2, and then our host introduced the different options that teens could sign up for. So some of these included baking, doing TikToks, creative writing, or book club. For book club, they did not have to read the same book, but they came and shared whatever they were reading, and the staff had some questions for them to facilitate conversation. So how that worked is just like we all are now, we're all in one main room, and then we had the host send them into different breakout rooms so that all of the kids who wanted to do baking were with staff running baking. After 1 hour, we all come back, and then you go to your second option. So if we were to do that right now, Astin might say, all right, everybody put your hand like this if you want to do creative writing. And then he sends all the creative writing folks to a breakout room. And then after 2 hours of options, we took a break for dinner, came back at 7 for a night program, which Jack will talk about.
4 options. It really does help to have someone who is the person talking about options and then the person who is breaking everyone into their breakout rooms, because the breakout room person has to go through and kind of keep track of everyone, and it's a little bit tricky. We did not find a lot of struggle with that, except in the chat I'm seeing, are you finding accessing technology as a barrier for your teens? Does everyone have what they need? We did not have a lot of that in our face for the people that actually showed up. I do think that we are missing a group of our campers who don't have either great Wi-Fi, a personal space, or a computer. I think that or a tablet. We just, we have a partnership with a local business that has donated to us in the past, and they are trying to help us secure some free tablets and computers that we're going to try to send to kids that may need that, because we do think that that is likely a barrier that is not, no, people aren't raising their hand and saying I can't do this because, and I think that it is a struggle that we're trying to figure out how to have more earnest conversations with folks about. So we're spending a lot of time on the phone, and anyway, yes, and we can come back to that kind of barrier later as well. So at 7, we ran what we called Camp Prom, and we invited everyone to come back dressed up. One of the things we are noticing is that the interaction between the real world and the virtual world is sometimes where the most fun stuff happens. So kids came back, they showed off what they were wearing. We did a little like, who are you wearing? And everyone like clowned about how they were wearing stuff from Goodwill or whatever. Huge variety of actual dressed upness, including our staff. We did that on purpose, where some of our staff were dressed like super to the nines, and some people just had like random stuff that they had wrapped around themselves, so that all the kids had some way to know, some relatable staff member. And we had, I think, 8 staff members on at this time, who were all volunteers except for Klee, Ray, Laura, and I. And then we ran Camp Prom, which we did a little dancing like Astin has been doing for us when we come on. And then we sent the kids into breakout rooms with a staff member to make up a dance or skit. And they spent about a half an hour making it up, and then they came back and performed. One of the things that we noticed about Zoom that is kind of fun for performances is if you ask people that aren't performing to turn off their video, they go to the bottom of everyone's Zoom screen, and the people whose videos are on go to the top. So we had about 5 kids in each group with a staff member. So there was, across the line of 5 or 6 people across the top were the people performing. It's kind of weird that it's in little screens, but it was fun. My favorite one was it Dua Lipa song, Klee? will you tell us about what they did? Because that was fun.
Yeah, this was a group of kids who I guess decided they didn't want to do that much dancing, and the song New Rules, they each put a smiley face on on their finger, and their head was like out of the frame, and it was like, one, don't pick up the phone, if you know that song. And then they kept going, and I think that was the crowd favorite. It created a lot of inside jokes, and it was really silly and fun.
So the kids were getting creative in ways that you couldn't get creative in a normal, like that wouldn't have worked in our normal kind of talent show type situations. And then after that, we ran a short mystery night, which you can see under Murder Mystery. One staff from Camp Prom got kicked out of Zoom and they screamed and then left. And then we sent the teens to different breakout rooms with imaginary characters. So Tom Hanks was there. Betty White was one of the suspects. Laura, who's our camp director's brother, was one of the suspects. And anyway, we then just moved. So in the breakout rooms, we just moved the groups to the next breakout room to be with a different staff member. And they interrogated that staff member, asking them about clues and things like that, where they had alibis and a little backstory. Like you probably have run something like that or seen things like that. Pretty easy to put together and totally staff driven in terms of prep. So you put something quick together and then the character is the staff member and the kids just kind of laugh and like joke around with the staff member to get information. And then we bring them back for a trial. And eventually it turns out in almost all of our night programs that I end up being the bad guy somehow, even if I wasn't a suspect. They all turned on me, and then in the morning we virtually threw me into the lake as the bad guy punishment. By virtually, I mean I actually was pushed into our lake, but we did it over Zoom. So again, we do a lot of throwing people in the lake at camp. So this was like just hearkening back to what we already normally do. These were each 2-hour blocks that we've talked about. So the first thing that Klee talked about was 2 hours. Then our options, we ran 1 hour of the option and then switched to a second set of options. And then the TED Talks lasted about 2 hours. It was a little bit shorter than that, but we just ended it. And then Camp Prom was also approximately 2 hours, 2 hours long. I think it ran slightly long, but our teens anyway didn't have 9 o'clock bedtimes, so it was not so stressful for the end. We put in the document 3 other ideas that we had that you can do for kind of night programming type things that are a little bit more a little bit silly, and we called them or they are just doing it some kind of talent show, a scavenger hunt, or what our friend Anna calls the bat that they run at their camp during the summer. And it's inspired by the Moth podcast, and it's just a way of facilitating storytelling. But they're all things that we are looking at doing, or we've run a scavenger hunt and a talent show so far. But just some ideas for what could be like kind of a culminating type of event. I highly encourage costumes or some form of like come dressed as, because it changes the dynamic from everyone being in sweatpants to something else. Klee, what happened Sunday morning?
Nice. So Sunday was the final day of our retreat. In the morning, we started Saturday and morning with an opening circle, just a quick prompt that everybody could go around and answer. And then after that, we moved into options again. So the document includes some more ideas that of options that our teens really like. And we ran it the same way. Come to the main room, tell us what you want to do for the next hour, and go to a breakout room, come back and do it a second time. So you get to do 2 options. And then we took a break and then came back in the afternoon for our closing. We played 1 more game, and then we had another gratitude circle, what we call Embers. And that was our teen retreat weekend. After that, I followed up with every parent who had a camper come and thanked them for coming and asked for any feedback, which certainly helped. And we collected some teen testimonials at the end as well, so that if we are to run this again, which we are planning to in our next in the next month, we have some ideas on how to get better. And now Jack's going to share some tips that we learned in running online programming with teens.
Winnie asks in the chat, did this take place as a replacement to week-long camp, or was it a new program you offered? We run teen programming during the summer, like I imagine you all do, but this was a new idea. We've never run a teen weekend before, so this was not something that was scheduled or planned. This was, to be totally honest, a test on two things. One, we were not seeing many teens coming to our other program stuff. Many of them had come to one thing and then chosen not to come again. And I think that makes a lot of sense, because there's a lot of younger kids playing Dungeons and Dragons, and the 14-year-old that's like the only teenager there is like, what? Okay, this is like fine, but it's like not that fun for me. So we were trying to see if would teen stuff translate online or not. And for us, it seemed to do pretty well. And I guess there's three tests. The second test was, would a kind of shorter in terms of number of days, but more intensive in terms of number of hours, be a program style that might work? So most of our stuff has been like you sign up for 1 hour a day for a week, kind of like an after school class or something like that during the rest of the like life that we've all lived. And this was something a little different that was like, well, could we pour a bunch of energy into basically 2 days and have it have, what would that be like? What would the different kind of feeling be like coming from that? And what we found is that the more immersiveness of it led to, I think, higher peaks for kids for some of them, but it was hard for people to commit to the whole thing. So we're playing with that. And then the third test was all of our programming besides this had been free. So we were seeing, could we charge for a virtual program? And you can see on our website how the charging, like how the tuition looked. And kids, we priced it at $50, but it was a sliding scale, so people could come. They just typed in a discount code if they wanted to pay less, and that was all put on the website, so it wasn't hidden. And we saw many people. We had 28 kids register, and we made $1,400. So exactly average of $50 per person paying. So I know many of you have free camps. A lot of our stuff is free as well. And this was an easy way for us to kind of let the tuition almost be a donation, which we're looking for lots of ways to make a little bit of revenue, as we're going to announce on coming up soon, likely that we won't be able to run our normal camp like many of you. So we're looking for ways to kind of supplement that income. Some tips for teen programming that we have noticed have worked for us as we made a bunch of mistakes. One, just like at camp, teens love the coolest staff. So they're more interested in really cool staff than they are in really cool activities, is what we've seen. So can we get the staff that the kids like the most to be on here with, and for us, that means also with some staff that maybe are more responsible, because it's not always that our staff that the teens like the most are the most responsible, but can we get some pairs together to make that work? I imagine that's similar for many of you with volunteers and staff. We didn't do a great job of this, and it got better as our teen retreat went on, but can we prep the teens on the fact that things are going to be a little bit silly, that they're going to be a little bit more campy, and not just like a lot of teens are on Zoom for school or for a lot of other things. So can we let them know, so they know the hidden curriculum coming in is going to be is very campy, which I think our teens that like our camp like the silliness, but they like it in like a weird teen way where you kind of have to like be like kind of winking at them, like it's fun, and then they're willing to like participate in it, right? Like they don't love the like so overt if it's like they're being treated like kids. It's definitely a delicate balance that you all probably are great at, and also have specific staff who are great at, and other staff who probably struggle with. That's what we see anyway. Within that, what we found is asking for feedback from the teens got way, way, way more buy-in just than if asking for feedback from 7-year-olds. This is true at camp, but it's worth reiterating, I think, in Zoom, because it's something that we didn't necessarily build into the structure of what we were doing at first, but kind of came up as we went along. Just asking for feedback, like we planned on starting Sunday morning at 9, and we just pushed it back to 10 or 10:30 because we just asked, and they were just like, yeah, can we just have more of a break? Was it feedback during the session or feedback after the session? Both, but the one that I think got the buy-in during the session the most buy-in was during the session, and we're hoping that asking for feedback after the session will get us buy-in for the next one that we're running, which is in a month or something like that. We found too that teens, if the point is for teens to talk to each other, then being in groups like this with 25 people on the screen leads to a lot more of this, which is just me talking, or just name the teen who's the loudest, that person talking, right? And we had seen that from some of our other teen stuff where we would get 20 kids on the screen, and then 3 kids would talk to each other and everybody else would sit and listen. And that's cool for some things, but it's not really what we were hoping for. So we used a lot more breakout rooms during the teen stuff than we've used during any other programming, because it's much easier for 4 teens to have a conversation than it is for 25 people to have a conversation. Build in hangout time, like Klee said, finding ways to balance hangout time in the big groups, because the big group hangout times are also, I think, helpful. They set some culture and some fun too. So kind of having that balance. And our teens liked being able to just like clown around and not have it be like structured necessarily, just like they do in real, this is real life too, in-person camp. And then the last thing is that we found was even more important for teens. We talked about this yesterday, is camp it up. Do things that remind the teens of camp. We sang our camp song at the end of the night on Saturday, and there were literally kids crying over Zoom about like the fact that they like were connected back to camp and they felt like they were home. Or we played Mafia at one point, very campy style game. Those kinds of things that I forget are what make camp for many kids sometimes, because I'm like looking at the list and I'm like, I got to get the kids in cabin A to do da. But those like little cultural touchstones make camp. And the teens at our camps, your camps, our camps, are typically the most bought into those, because they've been coming back and loving them and falling in love with the weird cults that we all run for the longest period of time. So how can we camp it up for them in that like weird, like we all know that this is like kind of silly, but should we throw Jack in the lake? And then the teens are like, yeah, and they can get excited again, because it's kind of like not, I think teens have a hard time taking responsibility. And I don't mean taking responsibility like cleaning things up, although often they have a hard time with that too, but taking responsibility for thinking things are fun when they're not like cool, right? So how can we take that off their plate a little bit by kind of bringing some form of camp that they're used to the weird screens?
A couple of general thoughts. One, when it comes to your breakout rooms, make sure like it's something you're comfortable with too. Like your intuition will go really far in handling those things. I would recommend starting small and then scaling up. It's easier to add than to take away. At least having one adult in each breakout room And you can have the host float around too. So if you need extra help, especially in a Zoom meeting, the host can be there to help those in those sessions as well. If you have more than like 10 kids in a breakout room, it's going to be like a competition for voice. So that adds a challenge to your breakout rooms as well. When you're planning teen programming, this is a good chance to promote youth voice too. So if you have like a teen council or something like that, engage them in planning programming too. Like, host a Zoom meeting for your teen council and see like, hey, what are y'all interested in? And it empowers them to recruit their friends and really gives them ownership of what's going on in the programming. But you're there to facilitate what that planning looks like. Leanne asked, and this could be for anybody, how do you utilize teens who would have been leaders in training on working on or developing their counselor skills?
Leanne, that's a really great question. We haven't done this yet, and we are choosing to do this during the summer as opposed to pre-summer, which is, I don't really know if we're super intentional about it, but it's going to be what kind of works for our schedule. But we are going to run a CIT retreat just like this that we just discussed, but more of the blocks will be for like developing counselor skills. And then we are going to invite them to participate in helping facilitate options that we're going to run during the summer with kids. So let's say Klee is a counselor and Ian is a CIT. They might get paired up just like similar to how we might do at camp. It's going to be weird. And then I imagine we're going to have, we haven't done this yet, but I imagine that what we'll have is kind of CIT mentorship groups where the CITs will go to a retreat, help facilitate if they want to, a variety of different online options, and then once a week meet with what would have been their normal CIT director to kind of just check in and discuss how things are going.
Klee, I know you answered this in the chat box, but for the sake of the recording, I'm going to ask it again. The question is, you mentioned cooking earlier. How do you guys do that? They're planning on doing a cooking session. Do you all send supply lists? Like, what did the logistics for a cooking session for y'all look like?
Great question. So we've run baking and cooking with what we call main camp online, so kids who are not teens, and for teens. In both cases, I did send out ingredients ahead of time to parents so kids could prepare their stuff ahead of time to make the Zoom call run smoother. We do tell our staff leading that to pick recipes. I listed soups, smoothies, and cookies, recipes like that where you can throw anything in to make it the most accessible. We'd love to be able to send stuff to families. Hopefully we could do that in the future. And we do let kids know if they don't have anything at home or if they just want to watch, that's okay too. They can log on and they don't have to cook or bake. They can watch other kids and the staff, kind of like a cooking show, and still ask questions and participate.
But Winnie, I think your point about food insecurity goes along with the screen deficit, the lack of devices or Wi-Fi, those kind of things. And that's something we're thinking a lot about and trying to figure out, but don't have a silver bullet solution for kind of replacing those kind of things. I think that the takeaway for me is I bet a lot of you have staff like that, whether they're whatever their thing is. What we found is that Zoom has become so personality driven. Our next most popular options are D&D when they're specifically run by this guy Brian, who is the most bizarre guy you can imagine in terms of like the way he does D&D. It's so silly and whimsical, and he struggles with lots of things at camp, but he's so good at storytelling. And what I think is really important for Zoom is finding people's superpowers like that. And they may, the best, we've talked about this before, but the best staff on Zoom might not be the same best staff in real life. I'm sorry, in in-person programming. So finding what people's superpowers are and finding ways to utilize them because the kids love that, I think can go a really long way. So, you know, reaching out to your volunteers, reaching out to your staff who are the types of characters that usually get kids laughing the most, or that kids like chant for at camp. Those folks can really help drive this when they have somebody kind of like next to them that can keep them, you know, keep the train on the track. Just like at camp, you know, you've done this strategy before. This isn't a new strategy, but it's something that is, I think, sometimes more true on Zoom than it is in other things. 2 types of training. One for hosts, that's about, so we've talked before about hosts and facilitators. The host is the person like Astin who's making sure everything actually runs. It's a little different and more challenging with kids than it is with grown-ups. So the hosts, we want to be more highly trained. They are all members of our leadership team during the summer. So they're people that are already really trusted and great in our community. So, but we're doing a 3-hour training with them on this kind of stuff. And then a 1-hour training with all of the facilitators who are coming on to do yoga or whatever. There is overlap. So many of our hosts also facilitate things, but there isn't always overlap. It's not always both ways. So some people are coming to 4 hours of training. Everyone's coming to 1 or 3 hours of training. And we did, obviously, all of that is happening over Zoom because they can't get together either. We can send you our like little staff manual. We had a much rougher draft of it, but Klee's putting together a much tighter manual now. Again, everyone that's on our trainings everyone that's coming to our trainings and everyone that has facilitated stuff or hosted anything are people that were already trained by us in the past. So we haven't necessarily gone to extreme basics with everyone because we don't have any at the moment new staff on Zoom. So they've all been to Stomping Ground for at least like they were at camp for 6 weeks last summer or something like that. So they're all people that get camp, that get how things work. So we can kind of jump to level 2 pretty quickly. Even though sometimes I want to go back to level 1 with some of them, you know, but we just only have so much time. We don't have any new staff right now running virtual programming. Winnie's question is, so you didn't have any new staff? Not yet. We're looking at new staff coming up for the summer, but that hasn't happened yet. Not as many siblings, but many parents who join in on the calls, who sit on screen or off screen, kind of depending on who they are or what the situation is.
I think Jack brings up a good point too, that you're going to have to be open to participants in your session, because like it's really hard to exclude participants within a household, especially if you're trying like a camper only program. You don't really have any control about like a sibling or a cousin or a mom or dad that might want to sit there too and enjoy the session as well.